You know that feeling when your entire world is built on a lie. When the person you'd bleed for, the one who held your hand at your parents' funeral, who promised you we'd face everything together, is the architect of your ruin. I stood there in my borrowed black dress, the silk sticking to my skin like a second layer of shame, watching her. My sister, Elena. The guest of honor at her own dazzling, obscene New Year's Eve gala. High above Manhattan in a penthouse that tasted like ice and money. The ball dropped on the massive screen behind her, a million pixels of fake cheer. And the crowd roared as she raised a flute of champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. She toasted to new beginnings, her voice dripping with a warmth I now recognized as liquid nitrogen. An hour earlier, I'd been in her private study, a silent ghost hunting for answers. My fingers trembling on the cold steel of her desk drawer. That's where I found it. Not the paperwork, she was too clever for that, but the key. A small, unmarked USB drive tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of The Great Gatsby, our father's favorite book. The irony was a knife twist. On it, a single audio file, dated from the week after our parents' fatal accident. I pressed play in the muted chaos of the party, an earbud hidden under my hair, and heard her voice. Calm as a surgeon's, talking to our family lawyer. The revised will is settled. Good. Leo was always too sentimental, too trusting. He'd understand the business needs a single, decisive hand, mine. Transfer the full trust. The $2 million from the life insurance policy and the liquidated estate assets into the corporate holdings account. Yes. Disinheriting her is the only way to secure the company's future. She's a liability. I looked up, my eyes finding her across the room of laughing strangers. She caught my gaze and smiled, a beautiful, brittle thing, and gave a slight, mocking wave. My heart didn't break, it crystallized into something cold and sharp. The noise of the party faded into a distant hum, replaced by the crystalline, damning proof in my ear. The sister I adored had orchestrated my poverty, my desperation, my humiliation. She'd stolen the inheritance that was our shared memory, our shared grief, and turned it into fuel for her ascent, leaving me in the shadows she cast. And that was the moment I knew, the real revenge begins now. The sound of the recording became a loop in my mind. A cursed soundtrack that played behind every blink, every breath, as I navigated the remaining hours of that hellish party. The confetti felt like ash on my skin. The champagne bubbles were needles on my tongue. I mirrored the laughter, offered vacant smiles, and performed the pantomime of a grateful, slightly overwhelmed younger sister, all while my insides were being methodically rearranged into a blueprint for retaliation. I watched Alina, my sister, my betrayer, move through her kingdom. At 38, she was the picture of ascendant power, elegant in a silver-sheath dress that seemed woven from moonlight and bank ledgers, her dark hair a severe, perfect twist. Her eyes, the same hazel as mine but now the color of polished agate, scanned the room, missing nothing, bestowing calculated warmth. She was the CEO of Vale Industries, our father's modest manufacturing firm turned into a sleek, ruthless boutique conglomerate. I, Leo, at 35, was the creative one, the photographer who'd taken the poignant, haunting shots of our parents' charity work that now hung in the corporate lobby. The one who was finding my path, a path she had meticulously mined with traps and dead ends, leaving me financially stranded and emotionally marooned. I left the penthouse as the first gray light of the new year smeared itself across the skyline, not to my cramped Brooklyn studio, but to a 24-hour diner in the financial district, its windows steamy with condensation. In a vinyl booth, surrounded by the smell of old coffee and fried eggs, I copied the audio file to 3 separate cloud accounts and a cheap, anonymous burner phone I bought from a corner store with the last of my cash. The recording was my nucleus. Everything would orbit around its terrible gravity. The following days were a study in cold detachment. I became an archivist of my own betrayal. I re-listened to the file 100 times, not to feel the pain, though it lanced through me each time, but to mine it for data. The lawyer's name, a hesitant cadence in his voice. The specific mention of account numbers and policy IDs. Using my meager skills and the shadow of a freelance journalist I'd briefly dated, I began to map the financial crime. The corporate holdings account was a labyrinthine series of shell companies and offshore transfers, but the trail, however faint, began there. The $2 million from our parents' life insurance, meant to be our shared cushion, our legacy of care, had been funneled into aggressive expansions and high-risk leveraged buyouts that had, predictably, paid off spectacularly for Alina. My existence, my claimed liability, had been erased to fuel her gamble. Meanwhile, I'd been surviving on a pathetic, guilt-drip allowance she'd arranged, a narrative of my fragility. She'd sold to the few relatives we had left. The humiliation was a live wire in my chest. But I didn't rage, I planned. I observed her life from a new, predatory distance. Her routine was a fortress. The Upper East Side townhouse with private security. The chauffeured car to the Vale Tower office, the charity galas and board dinners. She was insulated, protected by wealth and reputation. A direct attack would be suicide. The recording alone, leaked to some tabloid, would be a scandal, but she'd spin it, a misunderstanding, a necessary business decision, her unstable sister taking things out of context. It would burn a bridge, but not her kingdom. No, for true revenge. The foundation of her life had to be unmade, brick by brick, and she had to be the one holding the trowel. My strategy crystallized into a campaign of psychological siege. I needed to get inside her fortress, not as a besieging army, but as a welcomed guest. I began a subtle, multi-pronged approach. I apologized to her. I called her, my voice carefully sanded of its edge, and said the party had overwhelmed me. That I was struggling, that I needed her guidance. I played the lost lamb, the sister she believed me to be. I swallowed my pride like shards of glass and asked for a job, something small, in the corporate archives or publicity department. I could help curate the company's visual history, I suggested. She was suspicious, of course. Her silence on the other end of the line, a void I could feel sucking at me. But her arrogance, her belief in her own ultimate control, won out. She offered me a low-level consultancy to digitize the old family and company photos. It was a trivial, almost insulting position, with a salary that was a pittance but access that was priceless. My office was a windowless room in the Vale Tower basement, next to the server room's constant hum. It was perfect. From this forgotten cell, I began to ascend. I used my new, invisible status to listen. I lingered near the executive floor kitchenette. I became a fixture in the archives, harmless and quiet. I learned the rhythms of the company, the key players. Michael Thorne, the ambitious and ethically flexible CFO, who looked at Alina with a mix of lust and covetousness. Sarah Chen, the brilliant, disillusioned head of legal who often left meetings with a pinched, frustrated expression, and Robert Vance, the old guard board member who had been our father's friend, and who watched Elena's strategies with sad, wary eyes. I began small, anonymous manipulations. A printed financial discrepancy, left in the wrong inbox. A whisper to a gossipy assistant about Thorne's after-hours meetings with a rival firm. I used fragments of information I'd gleaned from the recording and my own digging. Never enough to trace back to me. Just enough to sow tiny seeds of doubt and discord. I was watering a garden of chaos, plant by poisonous plant. The heart of my operation, however, was the digital ghost I created, a cloned version of Alina's secure, private messaging app on her company laptop, which she sometimes left unlocked in her office during her morning swim sessions. A habit I'd noted from her charged corporate profile. The risk was monumental. One security sweep, one moment of her paranoia, and I was finished. But I needed a real-time window into her mind, her deals, her secrets. It took 3 weeks of patient pulse, pounding observation to get a 5-minute window. In that sliver of time, my hands steady and cold, I installed the mirroring software. Suddenly, her digital pulse was my own. I saw her negotiations, her contempt for partners, her casual cruelty in private chats. I saw her discussing me oncey. Leo is being oddly compliant. Keep an eye, but she's harmless. A ghost in the basement. The words should have stung. Instead, they fueled the cold engine inside me. I was no ghost. I was the architect of the haunting. The turning point came in late February, during a brutal ice storm that sheathed Manhattan in a dangerous glass. Elena was finalizing the Sterling merger, a deal that would cement her empire and, according to the messages I saw, involve creatively bypassing several environmental regulations. The potential liability was enormous, but the profit was astronomical. She was due to give the final, confidential briefing to the board in a secure conference room. That morning, I executed a riskier move, using my access to the building's legacy of e-systems, a system I'd supposedly been digitizing manuals for. I patched into the conference room's sound system. It was a passive listen-only line, undetectable. As the board members gathered, their voices murmuring about the weather and the markets, I sat in my basement crypt, headphones on, the hum of the servers a choir to my vigil. Elena's presentation was a masterclass in manipulation. She presented skewed data, downplayed the regulatory risks, and outright lied about the due diligence findings from Sarah Chen's team. Then, Robert Vance, our father's friend, voiced a concern. Elena, these projections from the Albany site, they seem to contradict the preliminary environmental impact reports. Your father would have insisted on absolute transparency here. Her response was not in the boardroom. It came later, in a furious, encrypted call to Michael Thorne, which my mirrored app captured perfectly. Her voice was a lash of venom. That sentimental old fool Vance is a problem. He's clinging to my father's obsolete morals. Dig up whatever you can on his son's failed startup. I want leverage. And tell Sarah to redraft the compliance summary, emphasizing the potential benefits, not the mitigations. If she balks, remind her who paid off her law school debt, and who can make her unemployable in this town. I stopped breathing. This was it. This was the mosaic. The recording from the New Year's party showed her fraudulent intent regarding the inheritance. The digital trail showed her systematic, ruthless corruption. And now, this real-time order to blackmail and coerce. Each piece was damning, but together, they were a narrative of ruin. I knew a public drop was still too crude. Revenge is not an explosion, it is a controlled demolition. The structure must collapse under its own weight. I needed to turn her weapons against her, to make her allies see the monster they served. I started with Sarah Chen. I created an anonymous, secure email account and sent her a single audio clip. Just the segment from the New Year's recording where Elena coldly discussed my disinheritance as a necessary business move. No message, just the file. A day later, I saw Sarah leave Elena's office pale and tight-lipped. The next, I sent Robert Vance the clip of Elena, ordering the dig into his son's failures. Again, no context, just the proof. The following board meeting was tense, silent, a glacier of unspoken accusations. Elena could feel the shift but couldn't identify the source. Her paranoia, once a tool, became her cage. She began lashing out at random, accusing loyalists of disloyalty, tightening her grip until her subordinates began to choke. I was the unseen pathogen in her bloodstream. The climax approached with the gala for the merger signing, a lavish event at the Museum of Modern Art. It was to be her coronation. I received a reluctant, last-minute invitation, a formality. That night, I dressed not in borrowed finery, but in a simple, severe black suit I'd bought with my consultancy money. I looked like a judge. The museum was a cathedral of modern art and old money. Elena glowed at the center, the consummate victor. I waited until the speeches. After the bland corporate praises, she took the podium, radiant and powerful. She spoke of legacy, of her father's vision, of bold new futures. As she reached her crescendo, I walked calmly to the integrated AV control panel near the bar, a system I'd studied for weeks. With a single tap on my phone, I killed her microphone and hijacked the entire sound system. The speakers filled with a low hum of static. Elena frowned, tapping her mic. Then my voice, calm, clear and amplified to fill the vaulted space, rang out. Before we celebrate the future, we should understand its foundation. Elena's head snapped toward the sound booth, her eyes wide. Security guards took a tentative step. I pressed play from my master file, queued and ready. First, the New Year's Eve recording filled the room. Her voice, intimate and cruel, discussing my disinheritance. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw our Aunt Clarissa's hand fly to her mouth. I followed it immediately with the clip from the boardroom call, her order to blackmail Robert Vance and threaten Sarah Chen. The crowd's murmur became a roar of confusion and outrage. Board members stared at their shoes. Sarah Chen stood up and walked out. Robert Vance looked at Alina with profound, grieving betrayal. Finally, I played a montage I'd edited. Her most damning financial instructions, her contempt for regulators, all from my mirrored app. I didn't play it all. Just enough. The symphony of her own crimes. I then stepped out from the shadows, into a pool of light, holding a simple handheld microphone I'd taken from the podium. The crowd fell silent. 100 pairs of eyes like spotlights. I looked only at Alina. Her mask was gone, shattered, revealing pure, unadulterated fury, and a flicker of something I'd never seen before: fear. You built this kingdom on a stolen inheritance and broken promises, I said. My voice not loud but carrying in the dead silence. You thought I was a liability. You were wrong, I was the witness. And I recorded everything. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud. I didn't stay for the aftermath, the shouting reporters, the horrified investors, the collapse of her world. I walked out into the cold New York night, the neon signs reflecting in the rain, slicked streets like shattered rainbows. The police and the SEC would find the full, anonymous data packet I'd sent them, that afternoon waiting in their inboxes. The demolition was complete. The inheritance money was gone, lost in the labyrinth of her failed empire. My revenge wasn't about getting it back. It was about ensuring the thing she loved most, her power, her reputation, her flawless image, was taken from her, piece by piece, by her own words, in front of the world she coveted. As I disappeared into the anonymous pulse of the city, the ghost finally at peace, I felt no triumph, only a vast and quiet emptiness. The cold had seeped into me too, but it was my cold now. I owned it.